NAFTA means jobs, American jobs, and good-paying American jobs. If I didn't believe that, I wouldn't support this agreement.
On December 8th, 1993, Bill Clinton signed the North American Free Trade Agreement, NAFTA, into law. Roughly a month earlier, in a debate with former presidential candidate Ross Perot on Larry King Live, then Vice President Al Gore claimed, "We will create more jobs with NAFTA." Instead of increasing jobs and wages in the U.S., NAFTA opened up the floodgates to a global race to the bottom, where companies, many American companies, relocated their manufacturing plants to Mexico, where labor was cheapest. They then shipped their products back to the U.S. to be sold to U.S. consumers. 2 decades after NAFTA had been in effect, the Economic Policy Institute reported that over 850,000 American jobs had been moved abroad. Why? Because American companies gladly moved jobs to Mexico, where the daily wage of a Mexican worker was roughly equivalent to the minimum wage per hour in the U.S. Especially in the business world, I think we take for granted that the global spread of capitalism, fueled by free trade agreements like NAFTA, has increased the quality of life for all by expanding participation in the market, often through jobs. But there's essential nuance here that's been overlooked. Not all jobs are good jobs, and trade is not good for trading's sake. Eric Henry, president of TS Designs, a large volume screen printing company based in Burlington, North Carolina, like many other US-based businesses, was forced to reinvent his business anew after bearing the brunt of NAFTA's impact. In this video, we'll share Eric's experience, explore the wider implications and context of NAFTA and globalization, and offer a vision for what a post-race-to-the-bottom world might look like. I recorded a full interview with Eric Henry on his experience with NAFTA, building transparent and localized supply chains, and how his company, TS Designs, has created the best damn t-shirt ever made. You can find that full interview linked in the description below. NAFTA was a trade agreement intended to remove all barriers to trade within the North American continent between Canada, the US, and Mexico. NAFTA was met with plenty of opposition from within both the US and Canada, but ultimately the campaign for NAFTA's adoption prevailed. NAFTA has since been replaced by the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement, the USMCA, under the Trump administration in 2020. NAFTA was an inflection point for US-based business owners like Eric Henry, albeit one forced upon him against his will. Eric Henry started his screen printing business TS Designs back in 1997 in Burlington, North Carolina. Business was good and growing, but with the enactment of NAFTA in 1994, culture quickly changed.
I think we actually need to go back to January 1, 1994, because that's really had driven me to where we are today, both personally and business. And prior to that, I had built with my business partner, who's since retired, but active in the business, what they call a large volume contract screen printer. So our clients were Tommy, Nike, Gap, Polo. Over 100 people worked here at TS Designs, ran 2 to 3 shifts. But prior to NAFTA in 94, it was pretty much everything was made in the U.S. I always like to say, to give you an idea, and way before your time, is in the early 90s, Nike apparel headquarters was in Charlotte, North Carolina. And the reason that was, this is where apparel was made in this country. We grow the cotton here, we process the cotton to fabric, and we made the apparel. So very successful company, got us into this location, 20,000 square feet. We were growing, the banks loved us, we were profitable, everything was good. Again, NAFTA rolls in January 1, 1994. Within 2 years, all those brands left and our workforce dropped to about 12. I realized then there's something more than a business and a bottom line.
So why was NAFTA so impactful? There are trade agreements prior to and since NAFTA. As mentioned, NAFTA has already been replaced by Trump's USMCA. There seemed to be something different about NAFTA from trade agreements that came before it, at least for the US, the largest economic powerhouse at the time. What changed?
There were some trade agreements prior to that, but this was the first major trade agreement. It was between Canada, United States, and Mexico. And what it did is, prior to that, there were all kinds of tariffs and duties to do things in these other countries, and they just eliminated it. The thinking at the time was the marketplace would dictate winners and losers, which I have no problem with the marketplace. But if the marketplace is only letting price dictate that, and Canada is more of a developed economy and Mexico is considered as developing, but it was two different economies. So when you look at Mexico, you know, they had much cheaper labor rates. And we knew that, but what the underlying is they pretty much did away with all environmental regulations between the two. So essentially the rules that they had to play in Mexico were different than the rules they play in this country here. So, you know, we knew it wasn't going to be a level playing field when it comes to labor, but what they did is pretty much says, we'll let the marketplace, you know, dictate the winners and losers. And essentially what happened at almost overnight, literally within months, I was down in Mexico City and seeing a plant that was, you know, the first thing that went was the cut and sew of the t-shirts, and then what's in the t-shirts in the U.S. So I go down there and I can see, you see the writing on the wall. It's if they're making the shirts in Mexico, which much cheaper labor rate U.S., you knew all the other attributes of the printing and the packaging stuff would follow. And we were right, I guess, at ground zero of the textile industry was North Carolina. And so we saw the devastation quickly of both businesses and jobs as things, I mean, just much over it. Ross Perot said that giant sucking sound literally happened.
Not only did NAFTA displace hundreds of thousands of jobs in the 2 decades after its enactment, but reports found the trade deficit for the U.S. with Canada and Mexico increased from roughly $17 billion to $177 billion over that same time frame. Third-party candidate in the 1992 presidential election, Ross Perot, was one of the most vocal opponents to the Clinton administration's campaign to pass NAFTA.
You implement that NAFTA, the Mexican trade agreement, where they pay people $1 an hour, have no health care, no retirement, no pollution controls, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and you're going to hear a giant sucking sound of jobs being pulled out of this country.
Later in 1993, in a televised debate with then Vice President Al Gore on Larry King Live, Perot continued on outlining what would be the NAFTA game. Buy U.S. manufacturing companies cheap, right after NAFTA passes, that are labor-intensive, that make good products, that have marginal profits. Close the factories in the U.S., move the factories to Mexico, take advantage of the cheap labor, run your profits through the roof, sell the company's stock at a profit, and go get another one. What was so wrong about NAFTA, as critics like Perot made clear? American companies would have an unfettered opportunity to boost profits by acquiring cheaper labor while still having the same access to the U.S. consumer market. NAFTA's largest criticisms were rooted in the fact that the playing field between the economies of Canada, the U.S., and Mexico weren't level. The Mexican labor market was far cheaper and far less regulated. NAFTA eliminated tariffs for most North American goods over the span of 10 to 15 years and removed barriers for foreign investment into Mexico. There are various environmental and labor regulations added to the agreement, but the enforceability of those were considered questionable. Negotiations on NAFTA did force the Mexican government to raise their minimum wages. While Mexico had various minimum wages depending on geographic areas, the New York Times reported at the time the wages in rural areas were to be raised to $4.50 per day, and in areas like Mexico City, the wages were raised to $5 per day. For context, the U.S. federal minimum wage in 1994 was $4.25 an hour. American companies could ship parts to Mexico, have goods assembled there, and ship final products back for a fraction of the cost. So, when NAFTA was signed into law, U.S. companies largely responded just as Perot had predicted. What's more, NAFTA didn't benefit Mexicans either. Millions of smallholder Mexican farmers were pushed out of the market by U.S. industrial agribusinesses. And with the resulting enmeshment of U.S. business, Mexico's economic health was tied to the successes and failures of the U.S. economy. Mexico was hit particularly hard by the various financial crises in the U.S. since the 90s. But profits soared, as did share prices. Supply chains rapidly began to expand across the globe as more and more manufacturing jobs left the U.S. So did supply chain resiliency and transparency. And while a globalized marketplace has created challenges all the time, we're made acutely aware of its complexities and fragility in times of crisis.
COVID was another wake-up call, just like NAFTA was, in the weakness of a global supply chain that's built around just price. And not to say we didn't have our challenges with supply chain, but at least I don't have to worry about that ship that's stuck out on the coast of LA coming in with stuff that I ordered 6 months ago. Literally, I can get in my car and see everybody within a couple hours of the product we make. There's something wrong when you go outside of your market for a product or service your market deliver. You know, we can make apparel here, but we decided to, as a country, and really the time we are is we got opened up and exposed to that global economy and realized things were a lot cheaper. But at that time, we thought that, you know, it would benefit everybody. Well, we see where that's gotten us. It's actually, I think, especially in the apparel industry, is now we have flipped from pre-NAFTA to 90% made in the US to now we're about 97 to 98% made overseas. And that's all driven by one thing: chasing cheap, usually unsustainable cheap labor. Even the experts thought, you know, it was going to take time to level this thing out. I mean, it was devastating, especially to our community. And the thing about it, if you weren't directly associated with the apparel industry or Usmca in it, you just saw the thing, hey, I get cheaper clothes. This is great. I can buy more stuff. But on the other end, if you're the company that's trying to supply that, you pretty much lost that business overnight. And that's what happened to us and a lot of businesses around here.
In my assessment, Eric sets a potent standard for what the ethics are of building a supply chain in a globalized economy. I appreciate that he doesn't mention explicitly that everything must be made in the USA, for example. But he says that there's fault in going outside of your market for something that your market delivers. If the only reason a business goes outside their market is price, it's worth questioning whether that choice is truly sustainable, ethical, and resilient, as Eric will touch on more later. So what's the litmus for building an ethical, sustainable, and resilient supply chain? How quickly can you see everyone who touches your product in one way or another? For Eric, he can see everyone in an afternoon. By definition, if price and profits are driving the expansion of the global marketplace, then considerations for workers and the environment take a backseat. And we've seen this over and over and over again. The problem isn't necessarily going global with our economy. The problem is with prioritizing the cheapest costs and highest profits over other externalities that impacts the communities businesses are moving to and coming from.
Again, I have no problem with global competition, but I think we have to look at a global competition on also not only a price standpoint, impact the people and impact planet. And again, it's no different what's happening today with the trade agreements that we have with countries around the world. Very rarely do we hold them to any type of people planet regulation. That's why we got the Uyghur situation in China. That's why we've got a question about organic cotton out of India. And in their own countries, they got their own rules and stuff. But it's, and I don't have the answer to how to fix that, but that is something that a lot of times we don't realize the other side or the downside of globalization, which is things are typically not made aware of us until it's too late. And I get the best example of that. God, this has probably been, I don't know, 6-8 years ago is when they had the the largest apparel disaster in history, where over 1,000 people died in this building in Bangladesh. Everybody said, "Oh my God, how does that happen?" And I says, "Look at what we're paying." And again, this is a few years ago. I think the average labor rate was 26 cents an hour. And what happened out of that, Cory, is no company was ever held personally responsible because they would work with their agents and stuff like that. So there wasn't a brand company over there. But I says, the blood's still in the hands, because you're in Bangladesh for one thing, to take advantage of that cheap, unsustainable labor, which gets you in a developing country like that. A building that was 8 stories that should never have been built was built and collapsed, and 1,000 people died. But then fast forward today, we got the Uyghur situation in China. That's the problem with globalization and opaque marketplace, is you lose that visibility. And we keep asking, how's this happen? Happen because this is the world we live in.
When visibility is lost, issues run rampant, and accountability is near non-existent. Businesses can choose to accept accountability or not. It's entirely voluntary, and worse, it's not particularly easy. Even businesses considered shining examples of what it means to be responsible and ethical in business have incredible difficulty managing their globalized supply chains. People who I believe have the best of intent can't seem to figure this out. Patagonia, for example, famed certified B Corporation, and in many ways a company built on activism, was a company sourcing their cotton from Xinjiang, where reports detailed widespread repression and forced labor of Uyghur people. As Matt Dwyer, VP of Product and Impact at Patagonia, interviewed by the New York Times, explained, as secrecy increased around what exactly was taking place in Xinjiang, where Uyghur labor camps are, Dwyer dug deeper. When it became clear it was impossible for him to confirm what sort of labor standards were being adhered to, Patagonia pulled out and sought other places to do business. It's worth critiquing Patagonia on their presence in Xinjiang in the first place. Why do business in a place where there's even the slight chance of hidden slave labor? Where you have to spend a year, as Dwyer told the New York Times, attempting to figure out that you can't figure it out. Does this not bring the rest of their global supply chain under scrutiny? While I appreciate Patagonia's decision to ultimately pull out of the region, and overall I remain a supporter of the brand, I can't help but come back to Eric Henry's refrain of having a dirt-to-shirt, completely transparent supply chain. Granted, we're talking about two completely different scales of business here. Patagonia has nearly $1 billion in annual revenues. But that can't excuse anything, in my opinion. It only more so points out the problem. Is Patagonia or any comparable company too big to operate ethically and sustainably? Should they operate at a scale where they can be certain operations are in alignment with their values and completely ethical? At what economy of scale, at what size and complexity of supply chain does a business receive a pass for repeated instances of labor abuses found in their supply chain? Patagonia is one of the shining examples of a business that's taken standards on environmental stewardship and likewise social responsibility to new heights. There are far worse offenders, but again, this drives the point further for me. If the best among those in business can't be certain about the conditions of their supply chain, should business be done in a different way? Not only that, should we rethink who the best in business really is?
We decided not to participate. We decided to stay here, and we had to change our directions because, obviously we were not going to be a low-cost producer. So first of all, we changed the mission of our company to be successful while simultaneously looking after people, planet, and profit. Triple bottom line, sustainable business model. And when you talked about that in the mid-90s, people just had a glazed over look. What's triple? Business is about making money. And again, profits are important. That's what keeps the lights on, and that's what keeps us moving forward. But we learned early there's more to it than that. And again, when you fast forward to today, and I think a lot of the issues that we're faced with, both impacting society, impacting planet, are driven by companies that are just focused on maximizing that bottom line. And we've got to start taking a more responsible, holistic view of a business's responsibility to society as a whole. So we focused on creating the highest quality, most sustainable printed apparel. And that's the journey we've been on ever since. And that's the journey we're still on today.
Can a global marketplace be fair? Well, to get anywhere close, complete transparency is key. We are either on board with transparency or we are confirming that there is a degree of exploitation that we have decided we are okay with. Transparency helps brands self-regulate. That should be the first requirement to do business, at least in the US. Much follows from transparency. Competitive edge is not worth the level of exploitation and extraction that's happening whatsoever. It can't be part of the game. If a company is required to risk or knowingly allow exploitation to be competitive, then maybe they are, or better put, we are, competing at the wrong things. And for consumers, there's both accountability and an opportunity to redefine what's important when making a purchase with today's globalized economy. Transparency. If brands can't tell their whole story, the rest of us have to demand to hear it, see it, to understand it and know it. Because it's not the brand's story anyways. It's the people behind it.
What I advocate is the first thing we should require is full transparency. The challenge we have with the apparel industry, even if you say made in USA, what does that mean? We need to have transparency of the whole supply chain of where the materials come from and the manufacturing, because to me, by transparency, you have self-regulation. I've got a Patagonia, going to probably say made in Vietnam. Well, that's good. But what I want to know where in Vietnam this was made. I want a location. I want a contact. I want a phone number. The chance of me going to Vietnam are probably about zero. But if the chance I do that, I want to have that. And we've done that because with our supply chain, and which is at where, WHERE, or clothing.com. And we've been doing this for over 10 years. And now we have a QR code that does this. But when we say our supply chain is transparent, I will introduce you to everybody in the supply chain, the farmer, the ginner, the spinner, the knitter, the finisher, the cut. So I give you a picture, phone number, physical address, and email. The most transparent supply chain that I know of. And fortunately, we do that in the Carolinas. But there's no reason that the Nikes, the Tommies, the Gaps, the Polos, or whatever, Adidas, give you that information too. I mean, that should be the first requirement. If you're going to sell product in this country here, you have to disclose the supply chain who made that product, because by disclosure, you're basically asking people to not only trust you, but it's a check and balance, because if I'm willing to make my supply chain, I'm obviously, not to say there's not going to be mistakes and things like that, but most likely I'm not going to do anything that's completely, fraudulent, illegal, or ethical or whatever. If I'm going to just here it is, this is who we are. And then in the back, we're, burning rubber tires. I won't do that. I'm not going to give you that, make it that easy for you. But I think that's the first thing that we do to start leveling the playing field is this full disclosure, full transparency. And I will call bullshit on bullshit when they say, well, God, that's our competitive edge. There is a lot that happens from in the back of this room here. You can see is a painting of the cotton field that we work with a farmer 60 miles away. And so there's a lot happens from that cotton field to this t-shirt that we wear that's on this table here. So just having access to that supply chain is not going to put you in business without throwing a lot of money at it.
Globalization isn't going away. We aren't exactly going to go back to pre-NAFTA days, but global disruptions have happened, COVID, and they will happen again. It's not just about sustainability, as Eric keenly points out. It's about resilience. Sustainability falls underneath that umbrella. There's actions businesses can proactively take if they are to align themselves with what's most ethical and responsible. There's actions governments must take so that doing what's ethical and responsible isn't left to corporate volunteerism. Moving forward, however, it's about education, in Eric's opinion. An educated consumer and citizen. It's about committing to transparency. Again, things won't return back to how they were, but they can inch back. They can evolve to something new, something better with time.
We're not going to put that genie back in the bottle when it comes to globalization, but we have an opportunity. And again, the COVID thing it was another wake-up call to that. We can do some things in a more local, connected, and ultimately a more resilient. I think that's I like resilient over sustainability, because we're going to, maybe my lifetime, your lifetime, whatever, that we'll have some other global disruption down the road. And again, as I said, we're not going to put that genie back in the bottle of globalization, but there's certain things that we can do a better job with. And one thing we do where we are in the Carolinas is the ability, the tagline that we use is dirt to shirt. We have it all right here. The only thing's keeping us from doing that is the marketplace is saying it get it cheaper somewhere else. But when that's somewhere else, you can't get it, or that somewhere else is a planet problem, i.e. they're just dumping the chemicals out the back and killing people, or it's a people side. They're basically indentured servants making apparel. This is a more resilient model. And I think COVID definitely bared that out. I'm not interested in per se changing regulations so it can only be, made in USA, whatever. I want, at the end of the day, in the country and the economy we live in, it is your choice. All I want to do is when you have that choice, you got full information, full disclosure. I'm not stopping you from buying those cheap t-shirts at the dollar store. That's totally up to you. And there's reasons why I do that. I'm not going to do that, but I just want to have the consumer to have full information of what they're buying, and then ultimately it's their decision.
Well, Eric will say himself that he and his business aren't perfect. He and TS Designs have become something of a standard bearer, in my mind, for what sort of businesses we should create and what we should expect of the business community. Eric's experience in the trajectory of economic globalization can firmly call into question the responsibilities of businesses with international supply chains to ensure their products are made ethically and sustainably. No product, nor any sales figures or profit margins are worth any degree of exploitation. Eric also adds nuance to the discussion around why it might be important to buy local and build local. If you can't do business in a completely transparent fashion, with complete certainty of how your product is made, who makes that product, and in what sort of conditions, maybe you shouldn't be in business. But it's all made much easier to be in the know if it's your neighbor who supplies you the beef for your brew house's burger. We must reimagine the purpose of business and our global economy to be about much more than money. And it's one thing to say that. It's another to truly believe that and actually do it. If not, then the only incentive is to make things cheaper, and cheaper. But as we've seen, we or someone else takes on that cost elsewhere. Workers are exploited, as are natural resources, air, and waterways. Global disruptions reveal to us just how fragile things are. Globalization has led to companies building with breadth in mind. Perhaps a new, more resilient, sustainable, and transparent wave of economic development focuses on scaling depth instead. All right, y'all, that's a wrap. If you enjoyed this video, then I think you'll love my newsletter, The Weekly Ensemble, where each week I share an essay with you exploring the art of living and working sustainably. You can join thousands of other social entrepreneurs and changemakers from all over the world who get this email in their inbox every week by signing up at growensemble.com/newsletter. All right, y'all, until next time.